Alright guys, so yesterday we watched the first part of the Phantom Nemesis. You guys are gonna have to excuse me today. Well, the whole week actually I've been feeling like I got hit by a bus. I actually went home early from work today. I'm just not feeling good. Have not been feeling good for days. Um, just constant nausea, things like that. Um, I was hoping it'd get better today. I just go in, sit down at work, and be able to do stuff. But it's just one of those things. My manager is awesome. I called her up. She understood. She got somebody out to cover me. But it's just one of those things where you start feeling bad, and it just keeps on getting worse and worse throughout the day. But I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna watch this video. I've actually got a blanket on over here. I got some. I got a drink. I got all this other kind of stuff. I'm doing pretty okay right now, as long as I'm not moving around too much and stuff like that. But yeah, it is one of those things right now. I think the hospitaler did it to me. In any case, we're going to watch this. It's the last 35 minutes of Phantom Nemesis. This is probably where he's going to expand on why he did certain things and do a Q&A session, all this other kind of stuff. And then later today, I'm going to be watching another video from the request for reaction tab on Discord, and I'm going to move on past that. I have a couple of announcements to make tomorrow. Just be looking, one, in the Discord, and two, if you subscribe to me on Patreon, head there, because I'm going to be putting out a video for you guys as well. In any case, let's go. Oh, it's animated now. Nice.
Hey there, loyal listeners. This is a fan with too much time. Here again at the end of the video to talk a little more about the Zektech sector. And this time we're going to talk a little bit about the forces, like the command forces within the Zektech sector, because there have been three big antagonistic influences that have shaped almost everything inside of that sector, and they have indirectly shaped basically the Imperial forces you're going to have in the example of Star Wars versus 40K. So it'll be a little bit, I hope at least, that you'll find it a little bit interesting as I tell you about how the commanders and the Imperial Navy in particular were shaped by the history of the sector. So, to get this off real quick, the three big antagonistic forces that have faced the sector are the Terrafont Entente, the Orcs, especially after the War of the Beast, and the Tyranids. The oldest commanders in the Zektech sector, the ones that are hovering, are anywhere between 250 to 500 years old. They will remember and have been trained on fighting the remnants of the Terrafont Entente. And they're not going to be nearly as powerful and as crazy as they were back in their prime. But the things that you need to know about the Terrafont Entente is this. At no point are they really superior to the Imperium in any one given category. However, unlike the Tau, which is another very large conglomeration of multiple alien species conceivably working together, the Tau sort of technologically dominate the other species in their union, where
True.
it comes to be that Tau technology is generally speaking so superior to everyone else's that the Tau just sort of come in and give it away, and everybody just throws their stuff away and takes up some Tau stuff. This isn't always the case, but this tends to be the case.
It is.
So, the Terrafont Entente were not like this. The race that dominated
Obligatory statement about how much I hate the Tau.
the other races among the Terrafont Entente did so because of a very powerful psychic ability that they had. But this psychic ability did not turn the other races into just brainless puppets, nor did they want them to be brainless puppets, because combining their technologies together turned out to be one of the very few ways that they could actually reap victories against the Imperium. And that was the big way by which the Terrafont Entente engaged in battle. surprising the enemy with some form of crazy, weird, unintuitive technology that the Imperium just wouldn't be able to foresee. Because of this, the commanders, the oldest commanders in the Zektech sector, are very, very cautious and extremely suspicious of their enemy. They expect their enemy to be able to do virtually anything at any time, but they don't expect them to be superior to them in the field. They haven't really fought a lot of chaos in the Zektech sector. They haven't, like, there have been heresies and there have been some chaos outbreaks, but as an example, Traitor Astartes have been almost unheard of in the whole history of the Zektech sector. Even during the Horus Heresy, Traitor Astartes did not show up in the Zektech sector because it was sealed up and off at the time.
Okay.
So, just as a result of that, they're not really used to fighting in forces which are the sum or equal to them in the ways that they consider themselves to be superior. The very few times they've been challenged in that way is with the orcs during the War of the Beast, kind of, and with the Tyranids, kind of. But as I'm sure you know, if you know Warhammer 40k lore, an orc is not the match of a space marine, and
Not
the
even
Tyranids are different enough that
The orcs would be like, it would take a seriously powerful orc to match up with a space marine. You're talking high-ranking knobs to war boss.
you don't really... They're their own nightmare. They're very weird. But in any case, the point is just this. The oldest commanders of the sector are very used to fighting against unpredictable, extremely wily, tricky, ambushy, like you can't predict what they're going to do aliens, but not against forces which are super straightforward and able to match them conventionally, toe for toe, tit for tat. And that's the oldest commanders in this sector. The mid-aged commanders, and by mid-age I don't mean like normal human mid-age. I mean like between the ages of 80 and 100 or more, somewhere out there, 80 and let's say 80 and 200. Those commanders are raised mostly on fighting orcs. Everybody in the Zektech sector fights orcs, but orcs were a bigger problem for a little while. And if you weren't fighting the Terrafont Entente, you were fighting the orcs.
Makes sense.
And you guys know how orcs are. They're very straightforward. They're very brutal. You just don't want to underestimate them. But as long as you know what you're dealing with orcs can become a routine.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the commanders underneath that, which have dealt mostly with Tyranid, Gene Stealer cults, and other insurrections and heresies for the most part. So yeah, clearly the older commanders dealt with a little bit of a more unconventional foe, and the younger commanders dealt with with much more conventional situations as so far as the Imperium is used to dealing with. So, the Navy. This is where it gets kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
As the Terrafont declined through the 10,000 years that they've been fighting with the Imperium, the Navy ceased to receive support. The Terrafont began as an extremely high-level threat. Now they are virtually, if not completely, extinct.
True.
This has resulted in the Navy of the Zektech sector being a pretty well-sized Navy, but made up almost entirely of really, really, really old ships. I mean really old. Like, some of these ships were some of the ships that the Primarch left behind when he first discovered the Zektech sector and left some of his forces there to hold and reinforce the area against the Terrafont. So basically, if you're a Warhammer lore guy, you kind of know, or a lore person, you know that the older your ships are in the Warhammer 40k universe, the cooler stuff they can do, but also the less reliable they are. So these ships have some incredible old weapons and power systems on them that make them pretty unique in the Imperial Navy, but they're also prone to power outages. They're haunted. They don't have very good energy efficiency. Some of them will short out if they use their main cannon twice or once. It really depends. A lot of these ships end up doing in effect, they roll dice whenever they do anything. Oh, okay, we're gonna transfer the power from the lower decks to the shields to absorb this incoming blast. Let's just hope that doesn't turn everything off when we do it. And so they do it and just pray to the Omnissiah that the shields get stronger and don't just turn off. So it's an interesting fleet. The Zektech sector can make its own ships, but because of the War of the Beast, its ship production capacity has been greatly inhibited throughout the last 10,000 years. They used to be able to produce all kinds of ship classes. Now they constrain themselves to just cruisers, and even with cruisers, they don't really do full-sized cruisers most of the time. They do light cruisers and escorts. And the big reason for this is because, well, first of all, a little bit of finagling by the Skywatch has made the Zektech sector lean this way, simply because the Skywatch knows that as a chapter of Space Marines, they can't really have their own navy per se, but they do have their own escort fleets. Hint, hint, hint. So by making sure that the Zektech sector can resupply their escort fleets by producing escorts and light cruisers, which are the few things that Space Marines are really allowed to have in abundance when it comes to fleets, they have ensured that they can treat themselves more and more like an independent military with its own navy, and that can be resupplied in this extremely unstable and often cut off sector.
Okay, so for Star Wars people that are trying to understand and wrap your head around, why wouldn't they eradicate the rest of the threat, and why is it the Zektech sector kind of like this? Mainly, the Imperium's biggest problem is not a lack of manpower. It's not a lack of morale by any stretch of the imagination. The Imperium's armies are inexhaustible. They are the sheer amount of troops it can produce on a yearly basis is just mind-numbing. The amount of ships, the amount of Titans, everything like that gets rather ridiculous rather fast. But the problem is there's so many fronts, there's so many places that troops are needed to go, that every single time a new threat is, observed, spotted, and cataloged, they have to do a basic threat assessment on it. And the Imperium cannot afford. It sounds strange, but it is very much the truth. He was talking about the Tau. The Tau hold maybe around 50-ish planets, tops. They might have gone up to 70 in the latest lore, but 50 would be a good number for them. Now, compared to the Imperium, they are a drop in the bucket. They're not even worth mentioning. But it's the sheer fact of the matter that the amount of manpower and equipment and ships and logistical support and everything else that will be needed to terminate the Tau once and for all would leave the Imperium open in other areas to be attacked. The whole reason the Tau survived extermination during the Damocles Gulf Crusade was because the Imperium needed the assets to fight, needed the assets that were currently engaged on that front to go fight the new threat of High Fleet, Leviathan. And it's continuously like this. There's only two factions, well, technically three factions, that would be relatively okay if the Imperium just decided to throw all of its weight at them. The first one would be the Dark Eldar, because the Dark Eldar, the Dark Eldar are hard to explain, but they live inside of Tim Burton's nightmare, and trying to do anything to them is kind of a waste of time. If you one thing to understand about the Dark Eldar, if you manage to get to Kamara and attack them and leave, the only reason that you manage to get there and do some damage and then get out is because someone lets you in at a certain position to achieve a certain function, and that person was a Drukhari themselves. They were Dark Eldar. Um, Osriel Vect actually allowed a chapter of Space Marines to literally show up in the middle of Comrock and just start wrecking everything around them. And when they withdrew, it left him in the prime position of power. And things like that happen more frequently than not. Imperial battle groups will, attack Dark Eldar only, you just don't go to Kamara. It serves no purpose other than furthering some Dark Eldar's agenda. The second faction that would be pretty much okay would be the Eldar themselves, because the Eldar sit comfortably in the knowledge that even though their numbers are pitifully small, that the amount of resources it would take for the Imperium to hunt down their craft worlds and eradicate them fully is something the Imperium isn't prepared to do. It's just they're just not prepared to do it, and not for a nuisance like the craft world Eldar. So the Drukhari will go to a planet and take a few 100,000 captives, a few million. The Dark Elves will do that. The craft world Eldar will do something utterly ridiculous, and they're basically a nuisance. Now, taking a few million citizens, that sounds like a big deal, but to the Imperium, it's not even enough to make any kind of planetary governor even flinch. And sometimes they'll make deals. Stay away from my world, go attack this world, The third major faction, besides, of course, the Tyranids, that would be largely unaffected if the Imperium decided to try to throw all of its weight into killing them, would be the Necrons. And that's because the Necrons' technology is pure magic compared to that of the Imperium and everyone else for that matter. So, but everyone else in the entire galaxy at this point is just free range. If the Tau managed to piss off the Imperium enough to where the Imperium decided to actually end them, the Tau would effectively be destroyed outright. And it wouldn't take nearly as much as some people would expect. It'd take maybe one battle group and a army the size of the Death Corps of Krieg when it attacked Vrax. But in any case, shutting up, moving on.
But that's really like like if you were gonna ascribe percentages, that's like a 20% reason. The biggest reason is just because the Zektech sector was so devastated during the War of the Beast that it has been very slow to get back up on its feet. And most of the facilities and shipyards that would have been used to build the enormous ships are simply not available any longer. So that's kind of why in the Zektech fleet you will find that the larger ships are all very old. You even have a hefty number of Grand Cruisers floating around in the Zektech sector fleet, which, by the way, all of this is in my discussions tab in YouTube. So if you guys want to see some cool information, just go ahead and head into the discussions tab, and you'll see some of the stuff and little hints I've laid out for you guys. But aside from that, all you really need to understand about that is that they have some Grand Cruisers, they have some old ships, they even have one ironclad that is from the Great Crusade.
Oh, wow.
That is still barely just puttering around with the rest of the fleet, with its enormous guns still sort of operational. That's the older ships. I mean, that's the larger ships. That's what I mean to say. That's the larger ships. The younger ships actually tend to be a bit more new and renovated. The cruisers, although there are several older cruisers, several of those cruisers have been able to be retrofitted because of the facilities, and they have also been maintained a little bit better. So cruisers and escorts tend to be, a bit more on the up and up in the Zektech sector. They're more modernized, they're better maintained, but they don't have the crazy old stuff like the bigger ships do. And some of the bigger ships have some really crazy cool old weapons, like some Godsbane lances, batteries, and stuff like that. So there you go. Now, the last thing I'll talk about here is just a little bit of a difference in design philosophy between the Star Wars universe and the Warhammer 40k universe, and in building material that really needs to be remarked on.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, in 40k, ramming is a big thing, and Imperial ships ram a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And the Imperial Navy in the Warhammer 40k universe is caught in this very weird place where they have to be a lot more tactical than you might think, because the Imperial Navy is neither more numerous than their most numerous enemies, which is to say that they can be easily outnumbered by orc ships and can be easily outnumbered by Tyranid ships, but they are not higher quality than Eldar, Dark Eldar, and even Tau ships if you look at certain metrics, which means that
that's a negative.
They don't have the best ships and they don't have the most ships. They just have some really weird ships.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things their ships can do is they can fight at all ranges. They have very long range, they have good mid-range, and if you get too close, blam, they'll ram into you. How do they do that? How can they survive doing that? Well, it is implied that there are some sort of shock absorbers or something inside the ships that help them absorb it when they ram correctly, but that's not the biggest part. The biggest part that allows 40k ships to do these insane rams is that they're made out of adamantine. Most, if not all, 40k ships made by the Imperium have some element of adamantine in their skeleton, in the husk of the ship itself. These things are. It's hard for me to describe to you how incredibly difficult it is to destroy adamantine. There's been, like, I don't remember where I read this, but I'm sure that there's been at least one lore accounting where a ship has essentially flown through a star by accident, and the crew died, and all the ship systems were burnt out, but the adamantine shell of the ship was so resilient it basically eventually made it out the other side, and there it was, and it was grabbed and retrofitted, and they scraped out all the corpses and the junk components and replaced it with new stuff, and that ship went back out eventually. That's how hardcore we're talking. Like imagine if you had an entire, enormous, larger than an Imperial Star Destroyer battleship, like a whole army of these things made out of Beskar Gom, because that is basically what adamantine is. Adamantine is essentially Beskar Gom that the Imperium has learned how to artificially produce, which, by the way, this is not easy for the Imperium to do.
No.
Nobody knows how to do this. There are some STCs that automatically replicate the machinery that do this, but they don't do it well. The machinery doesn't work well. Nobody knows how to fix it. Nobody knows how it works. But it produces adamantine for them if they just put in the right stuff. And they think that they're doing it right, but who knows if they're even doing it right or not.
One of the other things about Imperial ships is that they're incredibly durable. He was talking about with the hulls with adamantine. At the same time, the strength of Imperial ships lies purely, there are a lot of forward-facing turrets, there are a lot of torpedoes, and if you're thinking about a torpedo, think about a weapon the size of the Chrysler Building. We're not talking about a torpedo like, as long as, it's almost a city block in length. It's that massive. Especially the cyclonic torpedoes, which can, a two-stage cyclonic torpedo can one-shot a planet. But where the Imperial ships really shine is in the strength of their broadsides. When you're at the front facing of an Imperial ship, you're facing lances, you may be facing a couple of things like that. If you're unfortunate enough to be in front of certain classes of Imperial ships, you could be facing a Nova cannon. If you find yourself in the path of a Nova cannon, you're already screwed. But The sides are where the macro cannon batteries are. And macro cannon batteries would effectively tear apart anything that they were put in front of. I had the privilege of listening to a video last night. I can't remember the person that did it, but they were talking about a ship in the Halo universe called the Pillar of Autumn, and how it is basically a ship wrapped around a big gun called a magnetic accelerator cannon. Now, when you're thinking about macro batteries, that's pretty much what they are to an extent. They fire off large scale heavy ordnance, and they fire it off at fractions of the speed of light. This is where the Imperial Navy's true power really lies when it boils down to it. They can engage from afar, they can engage in Wolfpack tactics and stuff like that. There are certain ships that, pretty much make it an effort to do it, but the second that you start to see the side of the Imperial ship, your ship's going to take a beating, the likes of which it probably isn't going to survive. The Tau learned this the extreme hard way in their first naval engagement versus the Imperium, where one battle barge and an escort squadron, I think it was one strike cruiser and escort squadron, got into the Tau fleet and just started ripping it apart.
So that's how tough Imperial ships are. So, for example, last time we had Captain Spike's remark on how their ships are so large that he doesn't even know where he should be shooting them. He's actually going to learn that that's not really what's happening. His ships, it's not that he doesn't know where to shoot them. He's a good captain, and he does know where to shoot them. He's just being frustrated by watching the ships not fall apart the way he's used to seeing them fall apart. And the big reason is because look at how Star Wars ships are built. They're not built out of anything even approaching the durability of the raw materials of the warp-capable craft in Warhammer 40k. And a great example of that is when you see in Rogue One, the Alliance uses a Hammerhead frigate to cause one Star Destroyer to run into another Star Destroyer. Mm-hmm. Now, this is one Star Destroyer swinging into another Star Destroyer, being thrown that way on the power of the engines of this one much, much, much smaller ship. Mm-hmm. And one Star Destroyer has no shields or anything, and is totally unpowered, and is just floating dead in space. And using it, they basically completely slice the other Star Destroyer in half and destroy both ships very, very efficiently. I mean, I can't even tell you how many people died. Those two ships crashed into each other. The kill count for each of those guys inside of that little frigate that managed to do that is absolutely catastrophically enormous. Two capital ships done in just like that. Oh, the point is this. When you watch that scene, you'll see how those ships are just not meant for that. Like, the shields on the fully operational Imperial Star Destroyer were completely overcome by the inert mass of the other Star Destroyer. They are just not meant to absorb things like that. They're just not meant to ram, and they're not expecting to be rammed. Remember that, because I keep doing these battle simulations in my mind, and what I keep seeing is that Star Wars ships, all of their power is in their shields. Mm-hmm. All of it. All of it. I mean, we have examples like General Grievous throwing a melee weapon, an electro staff, that we have actually seen hit and not kill people, like many, many times. It's not even supposed to be a directly lethal weapon. We see him take one of these things, and with his own raw strength, which I'm sure is tremendous, but give me a break here, he throws it through the window shield, like the view screen of his own Providence-class Star Dreadnought, and shatters it, and causes a breach into space through which he escapes to get away from Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. Mm-hmm. Whoa. Oh my god. That is an incredibly weak, glass. That's transparent steel. I'm sure it is. General Grievous can throw a pole of metal hard enough to break transparent steel. That tells you that if a starship crashed into it, that would be done. It would be it. I don't even know how General Trench survived those missiles exploding on the roof of his Providence class when Anakin pulled his stunt, because he's just a hard to kill. He's just hard to kill, man. That must be what it was, because let me tell you, it is an incredible thing to watch General Grievous do that. I mean, if you want something even more, the Executioner. I mean, Vader's flagship.
Right.
My God, thank goodness that Darth Vader wasn't on it when the one starfighter with one pilot killed an entire city worth of Imperial personnel by suicide bombing with his starship the bridge of the Executioner. I'm sorry, I'm rambling. All I mean to say, and all I'm trying to point out by saying all this, is that Star Wars ships are very clearly all shield, no hull. Like, there is obviously some hull, but that hull is like freaking tissue paper. It can be torn literally by an individual, not even with a starship. It can be destroyed by an individual. So whenever you see a ship getting rammed in this story, 9 times out of 9, like, I almost can't imagine a situation where this isn't going to happen. It's going to destroy the ship it's ramming, because that's how Star Wars ships react to ramming. They are just destroyed by it. I mean, you could literally destroy a Star Dreadnought, an execution. You could literally destroy the Executioner by ramming into its bridge with a one-man starfighter, and that is canon. That is 100% hard canonical, all depicted on screen, all 100% happened just the way it happened. There you go.
Now, I have to disagree a slight bit with him in this, and it's just from a sheer standpoint of, what would be the appropriate thing to put into the law of averages at this point. I do agree with him when he says that Star Wars ships are all shields. I also disagree with him by saying that the only thing that killed the Executioner was the Lone Starfighter. Now that is all that we really see, but at the same time, it's more of the control mechanisms and the basically the command and control was severed, which is just bad ship design. But then again, Star Wars ships aren't exactly designed well. The Star Destroyers themselves are designed more for intimidation than really anything else, and that's what the difference between Warhammer 40k and Star Wars, the Galactic Empire, really is when it boils down to it. It's a military that is designed to basically scare, well, not, it's designed to police and scare a population that canonically is not used to a large military presence or force, and versus a military that has literally been in nonstop war for over 10,000 years and was designed, everything in that military was designed for the purpose of fighting enemies that were not going to, approach in any kind of polarity with them. That's where that comes from. So when I do hear people talking about how, oh, well, this would be able to do this, once you start employing the law of averages, it's all about power scaling, and it's all about the differences between the two. Star Wars, you hear there is a few major wars every 1,000 years, a few that actually occur. Whereas with the Imperium and the Imperium of Man, it has been in a constant state of warfare since its inception. It has been at war, It was at war to unify Terra. It was at war to unify the solar system, and then it left the solar system, and it was at war from the time it left the solar system until the time of the Horus Heresy, and all the way up until now. So it's been a continuous thing. Whereas in Star Wars, there has been periods of war followed by periods of long peace, and it's just a different kind of universe. It's really not fair, in my opinion, to pit Warhammer 40k against pretty much any other universe, just because of that power scaling difference. It's kind of like who wins versus Superman. Superman. Flat out. So it's fun to read about, but this is one battle group versus the entirety of the Republic. This is essentially one battle group versus the entirety of the Republic, with the Republic's numbers inflated. Now, some people said that, oh, there were only 7 million clone troopers. I cannot even fathom that being a reality. There has to have been more. I would count, if the number of clone troopers didn't equal 1 billion, it would blow my mind, considering the population of the Star Wars galaxy at the time. Anyway, I'm rambling because I'm not feeling good. I'm going to hit play and keep on going with what he's got to say.
So, just know that, yes, whenever a Star Wars ship that isn't made to be rammed is rammed by any Imperial ship of almost any size, that Imperial ship is going to plow into that thing in a way that is going to be extremely decisive. I mean, even if we're talking about the Executioner getting plowed into by an escort, which, just to remind you guys, escorts are like 2 kilometers long. Mm-hmm. They're like more than double the size of a Venator class, if I'm not mistaken. I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure a Venator is short of 1 kilometer, which makes an average escort, twice the length of an average Venator. And I say average escort because you might be saying, hey, Venators are all the same length. Okay, yeah, they are, but escorts aren't. No Imperial ship is the same size as any other Imperial ship of its class. Imperial ships are a mess. They're all built by different planets with no real standardization, aside from like what the tech priests can manage to beat into each other, and that's all its own mess. So the whole point is just this. Even if you see something as enormous as a 17 kilometer long Executioner class super Star Destroyer getting rammed into by a 2 kilometer long escort, that escort is going to go through that thing the way a bullet would go through you, unless there's something else going on, unless I have put something into the narrative to deflect away from that or to compensate for it. That is what we're talking about here. This is just, don't be surprised if you see that happen. And it does play really badly with the current level of technology that the Republic is working with. Their blasters are really short range, so they have to close range to get into effective combat range with the enemy. But the enemy can basically one-shot them if they can touch them. Right. So it's definitely not going to be a very easy thing for the Republic to overcome. But if you are a Star Wars fan and you're wondering why this is and how it's unfair, know this. This is all perfectly accounted for in the Star Wars lore. Mm-hmm. Yes, this is not stagnation. This is actually extremely intentional. Star Wars is engaged right now, as far as warfare is concerned, in the same weird nonsense that the British Empire and France and Spain and all those musket wielders way back then were engaged in, where people would stand in a straight line with the officers standing off to one side and fire into each other just like that, instead of use guerrilla tactics and more dynamic tactics. Star Wars has been engaged in doing this for the good of the galaxy, and honestly, it's good on them. They have no way of knowing that this is going to happen, so they have no way of knowing that it would backfire. But after the Treaty of Rusan, which is the treaty that was signed by the Republic and the Jedi after the last big Sith war, for the last at least a few thousand years, I want to say, the Republic and the Jedi, and just in general everything that's been forced to interact with them and trade, has been forced to adhere in some way to the Treaty of Rusan, which greatly reduces the capacity for warships to have weapons, the capacity for Jedi to wear armor, just a lot of different things. And honestly, the things that we're exposed to in the lore that are covered under the Treaty of Rusan are probably not all-encompassing. Like, these are just the things the writers thought of, like when they were writing it up as writers. But if we are trying to view the Treaty of Rusan as a realistic thing, it probably also directly affected and impaired the development of newer blaster, more lethal blaster technologies. This is probably the exact reason why you see the Imperial stormtroopers and the clone troopers using these really weird blaster technology that is slow. It's as fast as a baseball pitch, like a really fast baseball pitch. You can see them. Every single round is effectively a tracer round. They're not silent. They don't have endless ammunition. They do have to be reloaded. They actually have to be reloaded with 2 different ammunitions. Power packs after 100 shots, and a Tabana gas after like 700 shots. And the Tabana gas is extremely explosive, so reloading it is extremely dangerous. And you're thinking, well, crap, man. I don't want to have a really dangerous explosive in my rifle that can just blow me and my entire squad up if it's shot the wrong way, or if I'm shot while reloading. Well, that's blaster technology for you. At the same time, look at the Mandalorian. The Mandalorian has a disintegrator rifle that, I mean, you can't see the shots. The shots are invisible. They're not silent when they hit, but I'm pretty sure they're silent leaving the barrel, which means that they're as good as silent for the shooter. And yeah, they take ammunition of some kind, but it clearly pays in for itself and how effective the weapon is. It even seems to ignore armor, at least to a certain degree. So that's a really interesting and potent weapons technology. You're like, hey, why doesn't everyone just switch over to using that? Treaty of Rusan. That's the reason why.
Right.
And you might be like, oh, well, after the Treaty of Rusan is rescinded, which is going to happen eventually, right? Well, after that, everything goes, nope, I'm sorry, because unfortunately the Treaty of Rusan has been around for a few thousand years, and even when people decide that they're not going to obey it anymore, it's going to take them a long time to pick up from that, because there's a culture around that. And you might say, okay, well, now you're stretching it. Where's the evidence for that? The evidence is the Empire. And it's a very powerful piece of evidence, too, because the Empire is led by a Sith. And the Empire, despite basically just completely abandoning the Treaty of Rusan wholesale, still uses blaster technology. Still, I mean, and you can argue that they juiced up blaster technology by a lot, and they added a lot more to their ships, and there's just all this stuff. Oh, it's so good.
They really didn't.
That is probably the case. I would not be surprised and not at all resistant to the idea that a stormtrooper's like E11, or whatever they're called. I'm sorry, I'm not super up to date on the blaster names, but that they're more powerful than what the clone troopers are walking around with, and not just because clone troopers are trying to kill droids. I bet the technology is actually more potent. I really do. That
the technology for the E11 rifle is actually inferior to that of the clone troopers. The clone troopers are a vastly superior force than the stormtroopers. The clone troopers outstrip the stormtroopers in every single way, in training, in development, in morale, in capability. They outstrip the stormtroopers in every single major way. Once the Empire, this is part of that power scaling thing I was talking about a little bit ago. And I'm not dissing the Star Wars universe when I'm saying this. It's just a matter of fact. The Empire, the reason the Empire had trouble with the rebellion is because it was meant to be intimidating. It was meant to be a show of force, and everything resided with the executive branch. So when basically they had a small rebellion tore the Empire apart from the inside, and The Empire, regardless of what anybody wants to say, and this is the same about 40K, the Empire was largely incompetent. Um, just from a sheer standpoint of what it could have done versus what it wound up doing. What it could have been versus what it wound up being. Um, they didn't focus more on, like he was talking about, even though the treaty was removed, there weren't, massive renovations to weapons technologies. There wasn't this massive departure from blaster technology, which is a massive. It's titanically inferior to lasgun. I can't believe I'm saying that, but it's true. The E11 blaster rifle is a pathetic weapon when compared to the Kestrel pattern lasgun in every regard: range, accuracy, ammo loadout, the whole 9 yards. It is a pathetic weapon in comparison. And it's largely due to these long periods of peace. Now, the Star Wars universe does have its advantages. But when people sit there and try to say, oh, this will be able to do this, and this, no, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. There's two major areas in which the Galactic Republic has a titanic advantage. The first would be faster than light speed, which, considering the warp is placid, the warp is actually fast in the Star Wars galaxy, a lot faster than it would be in the Imperium, the actual Milky Way. It's faster, but it's nowhere near the speed of hyperspeed. It's horse and buggy versus interstate, 80 miles an hour. That's the speeds we're talking about here. That's where we're really at in terms of speed. The second major, and I'm talking, this outstrips the faster than light by a massive margin. The second major area in which the Star Wars galaxy has a gargantuan advantage, and I mean beyond reason, is in interstellar communications. Their ability to organize the entire galaxy, their ability to speak to each other. Compared to that, the Imperium looks like it's sending smoke signals. That's how just things work in the Milky Way galaxy versus Star Wars. Comparatively, you can jump in. If you're a Jedi, you can jump on a holo transmitter and be talking to somebody on the other side of the galaxy within seconds. Well, that doesn't work like that in the Imperium of Man. It just doesn't. Time has to be sent, messages have to go through the warp, and they reach in about the same amount of time. But in any case, shutting up, moving on.
Being said, they're still using blasters. They're not using disintegrators. In fact, disintegrators are still illegal. Why are disintegrators illegal for the Empire to use? They like bodies that much? I don't know. The point is that the reason, at least so far as I can tell, it's culture. It's all culture. It's a cultural reason. Imperial admirals and Imperial generals find it distasteful. Moffs don't like it because it upsets populations. Planetary governors don't want to be producing those weapons. People don't like it. People don't want to talk about it. People don't want to be involved in it. It's a culture thing. And it's a culture thing born out of the history of this galaxy. And what does this history of this galaxy tell you? It tells you, hey man, before the Treaty of Rusan, there were armies of Jedi and Sith creating biological abominations in the form of like giant Sith worms and dragons and stuff, and they were burning planets, and the Mandalorians were going buck wild, and they had combat droids they would ride on all the way through the atmosphere before they dropped down on top of your house and ate your wife. The point is that a lot of people would probably see the galaxy as having been a freaking like roller coaster straight into self-destruction before the Treaty of Rusan was signed, and then suddenly the Jedi went from being literal warrior knights with literal knights armor to being like these chill dudes who wear robes, and they're all about meditation, man. Oh, yeah, we're peacekeepers now, man. Oh, yeah, bruh. So most of the galaxy is really into that idea. Even when the Empire decided to break away from it wholesale, they couldn't break away from it wholesale, which is shown super evidently in the fact that all that technology is still carried directly over. And I'm sure that a part of that is also sort of like corporate nepotism. The blaster technologies are sort of like the oil companies. They're not going to suddenly go over and start manufacturing bullets or just roll over and die to the bullet companies. They're going to fight really hard and be corrupt and be everything they can be to keep producing blasters and keep selling blaster weapons and make sure that everybody in every part of the galaxy from every side is still using blaster technology. I'm sure that's also a part of it. But I don't think it's a huge part of it. I mean, I do think it's a huge part of it. I don't think it's the biggest part of it. I think that's maybe a 40% issue, and the other thing would be like a 56% issue, and everything else just sort of filters into that little last chunk.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. Rambling again. Lost where I was at. But yeah, so... Oh, right. The weapons technologies and the stagnation of of weapons development in the Republic. So... if you were to look at the Treaty of Rusan like a realistic treaty, it probably impaired all of these things. It probably busted down all of these things. So the Republic is simply not like a galaxy, like the Star Wars galaxy rather, not the Republic, but the Star Wars galaxy by and large is not a galaxy that is prepared to handle serious problems like this.
Okay, so a real world comparison to the Treaty of Rusan would be the Treaty of London. Now, the Treaty of London was a treaty that was meant to limit the power of battleships because battleships were looking to become absolutely absurd. The Treaty of London prevented the Navy from getting even more insane and ridiculous than it already was beginning to approach. The Treaty of London prevented, set guidelines on how many tons individual ships were supposed to be. Cruisers could only have so much tonnage, so many guns, so much armor. So it was an agreed upon thing by all the nations that signed it that we're not going to continue to build these weapons of just pure naval warfare that are just going to eventually, it's just going to be a thing where, whoever has the biggest ship wins, pretty much. But all that talk got abandoned pretty much after World War II. And it got abandoned for good reason because battleships were made obsolete by the advent of the carrier. And yeah, moving on.
This is almost the reason they need the Jedi, is to make up the slack for this. That being said, when it comes to developing weapons and new technologies, people like to crap on the Star Wars universe. How long did it take them to build the Death Star? How long did it take them to build the second Death Star? How long did it take a tiny military enclave with extremely limited resources to build Starkiller Base? Watch out.
I'm not really, of all... I hate to even consider the new movies as canon, but just because they're just so ridiculous. But in any case,
put the Star Wars galaxy under a lot of pressure, and it begins to produce some pretty crazy answers to that pressure. So all of this to say, don't count Star Wars out, but do know this: realistically speaking, Star Wars is starting much worse off than just hobbled. And you're going to see that sort of play out. And I'm going to try to make it as entertaining as I can and see if I can't pull out a few twists that you may not see coming. But when you have this is what I was trying to get to. So remember the design philosophy behind the Imperial Star Destroyer. The whole idea behind an Imperial Star Destroyer is that you could have one or two ships go to a system and lock down that system. And that would be all that you need. That's a cool idea. An escort from the Imperium of Man does that, and it does it better and more completely than a Star Destroyer would.
Yes.
So, and I say this and I emphasize it because the name of an escort is an escort. So in your mind, it's not going to resonate as like, oh, well, this is bigger than a Star Destroyer. It is. An escort is much, much larger than a Star Destroyer. A cruiser is much larger than an escort. A battleship is much larger than a cruiser. So you see what I'm saying here. Just one escort would be analogous to at least one Star Destroyer being in system. And that is sort of the benchmark. God, see, I ramble so much. I'm very sorry, guys. I can't help but ramble. But this is kind of the point I was trying to get to when I began talking about the differences between the way that ships are in the 40K universe and the Star Wars universe. To say that, so understand that when you have an escort ship in system for the Imperium of Man, that is equivalent to having a Star Destroyer in system for the Galactic Empire. Maybe even it's like definitely even a bit chunkier, a bit juicier, because the escort is going to be tougher,
Yes.
like physically tougher, and probably have bigger, stronger guns, just not as many of them, than the Star Destroyer would. The biggest advantage the Star Destroyer would have over the escort is a hilarious one. The Star Destroyer can launch fighter craft. Most escorts don't have those facilities.
True.
Very, very quick recap on that if you're a Star Wars person. In the Imperium, there was a minor rebellion among the Navy around, like, that centered around these two ship designs, and one was one came out as the quote-unquote loyalist ship design, and one came out as the not loyalist ship design. And what are these two ship designs? Carrier versus not carrier, basically. And not carriers were the loyalist ones, and so now most Imperial fleets are very loath to carry a bunch of carriers with them. And that makes it so that most escorts don't have that capacity. It usually has to be much larger ships. So then, in any case,
like
escorts don't have TIE fighters. That being said, TIE fighters. I mean, it's not very good when I have to look at your ship and I say, well, at least you have TIE fighters. I mean, that's not going to save you in a one-on-one fight with one of these things.
Yeah.
So, in any case, I think that you see what I'm trying to say. And with that, I will go ahead and put down my rambling right here. Thank you again for hanging out with me and listening to my spiel. Please go down in the comments and let me know about basically anything, but let me know about what topics you would like me to cover in these little talks after the videos. I'm really down to just talk about anything, but I definitely want to talk about whatever you guys are interested in hearing about. And if you have any questions, ask them. If you have a request for me to just chew on a topic or to give my opinion on something, go ahead. I'll be reading all your comments. I'm pretty sure you guys know that I go through those every day. And yeah, until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.
So, one thing that I do need to emphasize, he said one Star Destroyer to one escort. That's not even approximate for me. At the very least, if we're looking at Cobra, Sword, or any of the other type of standard Imperial Navy escorts, I'd say 3 upwards of 4 Star Destroyers per one of those, just based off of based off design specs, everything else like that, and how damaging it would be. You'd be looking at least 3 to 4 would be needed to match it, if not more. And I'm being generous here, but in any case, I'm gonna get this posted. I'm gonna get myself a drink and try to feel a little bit better, and I will see you guys on the next one, which will be on Wednesday, by the way. catch you guys then.